Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conversation on the role of industry in Southeast Asia's energy transition. My name is Ashish, Sethia, and I'm your host and moderator for today's session. I would first do initial brief opening about this subject and then call upon an expert group of speakers to have this conversation discussion. So let me begin by briefly introducing BloombergNEF, the organization I work for. We essentially provide strategic insights into the commodities, energy, transportation, mobility, digital technology, and the materials industry. And just a couple of weeks ago, my team at BloombergNEF published the New Energy Outlook 2020, which you would see on the next slide. As you can observe here, the first thing to notice is that 2019 obviously was a year where energy industry was still growing, and 2020 has come with a number of challenges and setbacks, which we'll discuss in detail. It would take us probably 2 to 3 years for primary energy demand globally to come back to the pre-virus or pre-pandemic levels. And you would also observe on this slide, perhaps, that the growth in primary energy demand globally in the future might be much slower than the growth in the last 2 decades. There are a few different reasons for that. The first one, obviously, being that many economies are transitioning from industrial economies to service-oriented economies. You also have a growing share of renewable energy in the primary energy mix. And when you have more renewable energy, you have lesser losses while moving from primary energy to final or useful energy. So that helps. And you have obviously growing energy efficiency as well. A few other things to highlight on this chart. We expect that actually global coal demand has peaked last year. We expect oil demand to peak in 2035. We expect gas to continue to grow in the primary energy mix by a rate of roughly 0.5% a year and reach almost 24% market share in primary energy mix by 2050. And we expect a significant rise in renewable energy from 4% of primary energy mix today to roughly 14%. So that's a phenomenal growth. On the next slide, you'd observe a slightly different.
Sorry, we're gonna stop this. Ashish, I think you're muted by, yeah.
Do you know when did I mute?
Yeah, about 30 seconds ago?
How did that happen?
Just when you started on this slide,
Yeah.
then you muted. Just when you flip from one slide to the next one, then you were muted.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know why that happened. I didn't touch anything at all on my side.
Okay, no worries. Do we take it from this slide?
Yeah, that's fine. I can
Yeah,
do it from
do we take it from this slide? So we'll do the count again, yeah? All right. Hazrin, are you ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1, go.
You notice on this slide the role that electricity plays in the primary energy mix, and it is expected to grow over the years, primarily driven by the growth in renewable energy. Let's move on to the next slide and see where this renewable energy or where this electricity will come from. And on the next slide, you would observe that the world will have a significant amount of investment going in the power generation sector. So we need roughly $15 trillion of investment between now and 2050 in power generation. 80% of that would go into renewable electricity and energy storage technologies. Roughly 45% of this 15 trillion needs to go into the Asia Pacific region, which is roughly equivalent to all of the investment that would go into Americas as well as Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. So Asia is really the center of gravity in terms of new potential investment in power generation. A few other things to mention very quickly is obviously as you invest more money into power generation technologies, particularly renewable electricity, you have to strengthen the power grids. And we expect another $14 trillion, which is not on this slide, to be invested in power transmission and distribution segments. So this must seem like a fantastic progress that is being made. However, if you go to the next slide and look at what this means from an emissions perspective, the good news is emissions seems to have peaked in this scenario of ours in 2019. But the bad news is that they're not falling fast enough to get us anywhere close to 1.5 degree global warming targets that the world has set upon itself in the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So a lot more needs to be done. And while we are making significant progress on the electricity power generation side, we might not be making fast enough progress on some of the other energy consuming sectors. So on the next slide, you would observe that demand for critical materials like steel and cement is expected to grow significantly. And in Southeast Asia, interestingly, steel demand is expected to be 3 times of where it is today by 2050. And cement demand is going to grow by almost 2.5 times between now and 2050. So apart from decarbonizing the power sector, you also have to think about decarbonizing the industrial sector. And unless the energy transition accelerates in Southeast Asia, it would be very difficult to meet the ambitions of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So with that, let me call upon an expert set of speakers and panelists to debate and discuss this subject along with me. Quick set of introductions. We have Douglas Wharton, who's the Vice President of Origination and Marketing for Asia at Cheniere Energy. Mr. Paul Maguire, President and CEO of Asia Pacific for ENGIE. Mr. Jarand Rystad, the CEO of Rystad Energy. Osamu Ono-san, Managing Director and CEO of Mitsubishi Power Asia Pacific. And Dolf, Gielen, Director, IRENA Technology and Innovation Center. So let me first begin by asking first question from Douglas. We obviously cannot avoid this question given the date and timing of this session. And the question is, what do you think is the impact of the US elections and the potential outcome that we're seeing now on the energy policy of the country and the exports of LNG in particular?
Great. Well, first, thank you. And it's really my pleasure and honor to be part of this panel. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. I appreciate that we're starting with the easy questions first to comment on the current U.S. political situation. But before I do comment on that, perhaps I could just start by sharing a few thoughts on, from the perspective of an LNG producer, what we see as the role of natural gas in LNG in the ASEAN region. So just a few thoughts, in particular, I enjoyed your opening remarks on just kind of setting the scene and some of the challenges facing the region. And we would say that natural gas and LNG is going to play a key role in shaping the energy transition in ASEAN. And really no one solution fits all in ASEAN. I mean, each country is going to have their own respective challenges and needs that we need to work with them to address. And I think it's important as we look, in terms of, you correctly pointed out some of the challenges of decarbonization. Really, when we look at any scenario, we think natural gas and LNG is going to play an important role. I mean, natural gas is the cleanest burning fossil fuel, and it's going to play an important role in many aspects of the decarbonization challenges. And I'm happy to talk more about that as we go forward. From our perspective and my role in Cheniere, I engage, customers throughout Asia, trying to find solutions to their energy challenges and working to share in the success in doing that. So for those who aren't familiar with Cheniere, we are the largest US LNG producer, and we're the second largest operator of LNG production globally. So we have a diverse group of 20 long-term customers that we work with from across the LNG value chain. National oil and gas companies, international oil companies, traders, traditional end users, European utilities. So the whole spectrum, and that allows us to understand, a diverse set of challenges and needs across that customer base. So particularly in ASEAN, we're closely engaged with, ASEAN as a whole, and in particular, I work a lot with customers in Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam to understand their natural gas and LNG requirements. And I think U.S. LNG is going to play a role. And I'm getting to answer your question on the political landscape. U.S. LNG is the fastest growing source of LNG supply over the past 5 years. It's brought a lot of change to the market in terms of increased flexibility, liquidity. It's really driving change in the marketplace. And I think, at the time we're recording this, we're getting some clarity on the results of the U.S. election. I think, it's really too early to offer any definitive feedback. I still think there's some things to play out in terms of the Senate races, for example. But I think regardless of the election outcome, we're going to continue to work in a bipartisan manner with both sides of the political spectrum. That's not going to change. We continue to see strong bipartisan support for natural gas, really as an abundant, affordable, and reliable energy source. And if you think about it, US LNG, we think, is part of the answer to many questions, including the energy transition, climate change, and addressing the balance of trade between the US and some of its partners. At the end of the day, natural gas production, LNG exports have strong economic benefits, create jobs, and that's true in blue or red states. So we are confident of the future and the positive role that natural gas and LNG can play, and looking forward to discussing more with the rest of the panel. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Douglas. I'll surely have more questions later on the role of natural gas. Paul, let me move over to you, and very brief opening remarks from you as well on where we are in your mind in the energy transition and the role that ENGIE plays in that.
So look, let me just firstly say it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I think it's an interesting moment in time in the energy transition, and I think ENGIE as a company is looking to play an important role. We're mobilising as an organisation to become a leader in the energy transition because we think industry's got a very important role to play, working together with business, governments, policymakers, to help Southeast Asian countries achieve their energy transition targets. As an organisation, our purpose is to accelerate the transition to a carbon neutral economy. So now is a very interesting time. We've got 160,000 people in 5 different continents working hard on the energy transition. But I might say I see 3 themes coming through consistently as we look at the transition. Decarbonisation is one that you've touched on. So we'll see more low CO2 generation. I think we'll see a lot of things like fuel switching, particularly in regards to transport. The second theme we see is decentralisation. So more and more small-scale energy assets sitting around the grid, particularly solar PV and battery storage. And lastly, I've mentioned digitalisation. So more information is coming from the Internet of Things, and smart software is being used to drive the more efficient use of energy in people's homes and people's businesses, as well as aggregating the benefits from decentralised energy assets. So for us, just to talk about maybe what ENGIE's been doing recently, we've had some big transformations. Here in Asia Pacific, we've moved completely away from coal-fired generation. We've sold or closed over 8,000 megawatts of generation in the last 3 years. And we're investing a lot more globally in renewables. So we added 3,000 megawatts to the portfolio last year, and I expect we'll do something similar in 2020. And we're using business models to support our customers. And customers are changing. We're seeing prosumers, peoples and businesses who want to grow their own energy. We're supporting green mobility and energy efficiency in particular. And one point that I think would be interesting to discuss for the panel, particularly with Southeast Asia, is the cooling needs of these economies. Because the climate is, as we know, particularly hot, particularly humid. So it's a topical issue given the amount of growth. Anyway, whilst we don't seek to do everything to everything for everybody everywhere. As an organisation, ENGIE, we're very focused on co-creating solutions for our customers that help them with their own sustainability development goals.
Thanks for that, Paul. Interesting perspective on kind of the 3Ds in the energy sector. A few years ago, I used to use the word democratization as well, along with decentralization, because that's apparently an interesting theme as well. And the fifth one, perhaps the fourth or fifth one, is probably deregulation, but we'll have to wait and watch how that plays out. Let me move on to Jarand and ask probably the similar question on where do you think we are in the energy transition, and particularly in the Southeast Asian region?
Yeah, I think really 2020 and 2021 is the inflection point for the energy transition, where you really will see this being speeded up, basically because both on the generation side and on the consumption side, the new technologies are actually competitive, even without the subsidies in general. So it will be a business case to convert to a EV, very many places for transportation. And it's a business case also for businesses to rather build solar PV production of power rather than coal-fired power plants or any thermal power plants, actually. So, and with the COVID-19 situation, you see actually that very much fossil fuel is put on hold and postponed. And I think some of these projects will never come back. While in the renewables, of course, you have had some project disruptions also in renewables, but you see that has been much more robust through the cycle. And we actually see quite much sanctioning already today. So I think actually also the net effect of the COVID-19 situation has been speeding up this energy transition. So I really, you showed us some graphics now on the trajectory going forward. I think we can be on the kind of more optimistic side even on that in terms of implementation of green technologies. Because, solar has come down to a price now of $25 to $30 per megawatt hours. Of course, you then, due to the intermittency, you need storage. But looking at battery storage now with the latest development and the number of cycles you can have on one battery, you can maybe be able to capture the morning peak and the evening peak for less than 60 or 50 actually dollars per megawatt hour as well. And that's only for kind of 1/3 of the total power production. So actually solar alone with storage and intermittency kind of mitigation will be cheaper than thermal sources. But of course, it is a lag. It takes time to build all of this. But I think we will see a really quick transition towards these zero carbon energy sources. So in that sense, I'm actually quite optimistic even to reach the 1.5 degree scenario. Of course, that's a long reasoning to really see how we get there. But actually, we get the data to add up to that based on actually pure economics and pure kind of economical rational decisions taken by the different players in the industry.
Jarand, fantastic to see your optimism. I find that fascinating and very useful for this conversation. I would say, though, that obviously one of the questions I'd pose to many of you later on is around how easy or difficult it is to decarbonize beyond the power sector. And I think that's kind of the holy grail of getting to the answer to this question of whether we can limit global warming to 1.5 degrees or less. But let's move on for this moment. And Ono-san, I wanted to bring you in and get your perspective on where we are with the energy transition. Obviously, East Asia has seen a lot of momentum in the last month or so, with China, Japan, South Korea all coming in and saying that they aspire to be carbon neutral by certain dates or years, right? So opening thoughts from you on where we are in the energy transition and whether this can accelerate much faster.
Thank you very much, Ashish, for introduction. And it's a great honor and pleasure to be on this panel. So we Mitsubishi Power, so we are a Japanese origin manufacturer as well as a solution provider. So we have the more than 100 years of experience and history for the manufacturing in this power generation industry. And we are very standby in this ASEAN Pacific region to contribute to provide our equipment as well as services. So I would like to say we will understand this area and cultures and the natures. So and also through the long history to the customers, partners, and government. So I would like to say we have a very transparent understanding mutually to how to proceed this energy transition. So in Japan, recently, new Prime Minister, Mr. Suga, he announced zero emission by 2050. This is very first time to mention the Japanese government to set the deadline to zero emission. And in Singapore, recently, a very big event, it's called the Singapore International Energy Weeks. Through those weeks, we can exchange the idea and also hear so many opinions for each country's the higher government officers as well as the key player in this region. So we came to know this Asia Pacific region, as Aisha pointed out, still going the very strong economic growth, and this is the driver over the world for economic growth at present. So that means the affordable energy duly required, as well as the decarbonization. So through the Singapore Energy Week, we came to know some of the tendency and also the announcement of each countries. The very mainstream is like that. Still, this AP region require coal, but they also make a strong mind to decarbonization. The tendency is like that. The coal move to LNG, and the LNG will go to the renewables, like blue hydrogen, blue ammonia, and then green hydrogen or green ammonia. So I think simultaneously there's the tendency. Also, the other renewable is the expanding, like a solar, of course, the wind energy. So such kind of mixture of the transition will move in this area. So through the understanding of all the countries and also our members, partners, so we can develop some of the new technology. So and some of the mixture of those energy and also the method to transaction of this energy will be very important. But as I said, it needs some time as a gradual, because of the energy security is very important in this area. IEA reported around 45 million people in this area still no electricity. So we have to also contribute such situation. So that means we should move the decarbonization with the keeping or the expand that's access to the energy. So those two mainstream we should realize simultaneously. So for this path, so the collaboration, maybe like a government sector and the power provider and like our service provider, collaboration and the partnership will be very important, and which will accelerate such a transition.
Ono-san, thank you for that. I find a little bit of difference in opinion between you and what Jarand said in terms of the pace of the transition, but I think both of you agree that we are kind of on that track already. So let me bring in Dolf now. Dolf, we have heard from the other speakers. What's your opening kind of perspective on where we are in the transition and particularly in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ashish. I mean, as one of the fastest growing regions in the world, ASEAN is crucial to the global energy transformation. And we see significant energy transition potentials. And I can build on what Paul and Jarand just said. I mean, we also see a very strong potential for renewables. And together with the ASEAN Center for Energy and the support of the Danish government, we are currently assessing the energy transition potentials in the region. And we see a transition that rests on 3 pillars: energy efficiency, renewables, and electrification. And that builds on the cost for renewable power that have come down tremendously. We see that the cost of solar PV in the region are in line with the global numbers we see, around 6 cents, 7 cents per kilowatt hour. For onshore wind, it's still a little bit higher, but still talking about 10 cents a kilowatt hour for last year, commissioned projects. And we see that these costs continue to fall. And so that is a main driver. Of course, we will need more attention for power systems flexibility to enable the integration of these high shares of variable renewables. But we see a potential to increase renewables from 20% of generation in 2017 to more than 50% by 2030. So very significant growth potential. Now, the other part of the coin, as you mentioned, is the end-use sectors. We need more attention for buildings, industry, and transport. And of course, the interesting developments are in transport, with electromobility growing rapidly worldwide. We think there's also important opportunities in the region. And you mentioned industry, and that will be a critical sector for the region. There is 400 million tons of cement production capacity, and that will continue to grow. So what to do in that sector? Steel demand is 80 million tons a year. Steel production is only 40 million tons per year. The region is a major steel importer. So how to deal with that? And you see now also rapidly growing chemical and petrochemical industry. So all these energy intensive industries require solutions. We recently looked at what we see as technology potential. We see that renewables can achieve more than 50% emissions reduction in industry and transport. But of course, you have to look at the regional specifics. So that is something we're currently working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Dolf. Paul, let me bring you in here as well. Dolf mentioned 6 to 7 cents a kilowatt hour as kind of the cost of renewable power generation in Southeast Asia. We have seen much lower numbers, obviously, in other parts of the world. We have looked at 3 cents in a few other parts of the world. What can help us get there in this region? And when do we hit tipping points? Are we already at tipping points compared to thermal or coal power generation in particular at 6, 7 cents, or we need to get much lower?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, the reality is the answer often depends on the country that you're referring to and whether or not it enjoys the benefit of being rich in natural renewable resources, whether that's wind, hydro, geothermal, solar. That can have a significant impact on the ability to deliver solutions which from an LCOE perspective are attractive to customers. I think the key thing I'd point to in sort of reaching that sort of environment is probably policy. Policy and regulation, I think, is, it's the catalyst that has the broadest reach. It's the catalyst that attracts the necessary capital at scale to really make a difference. So I think governments in particular are uniquely placed to create frameworks which can leverage off the natural attributes of their country. And then I think what happens is, capital's mobile. Investors, financiers look for certainty. certainty around payment arrangements, certainty around risk-sharing arrangements for projects. And I think once you've got that in place, then industrial investors like ourselves, will compete hard. We'll bring the latest, the most innovative technology, and we'll deliver it at competitive prices. Because, I think everybody, every man, woman, government, company would love to live more sustainably. But the challenge is always going to be around being able to do that affordably so that you don't destroy your economy in the process. And maybe a good example that I would point to in terms of what can be achieved would be the Malaysian large-scale solar scheme, where you probably saw tariffs that were in the 20 cents. And in the results of the last tender, then they've dropped around 20%. And that's probably in less than 12 months. So to reinforce the points that were made earlier about what's happening with the cost of technologies, particularly solar, particularly onshore wind, they still continue to come down the cost curve. And similarly, our observations would be the same as what was said earlier. Battery storage is going in exactly the same direction. Will it go at the same pace that we've seen solar go at? I'm not sure, but it's certainly going to be cheaper in the future, not more expensive. So I think, to answer your question, I think there's 2 points here. One is if we create the right framework in Southeast Asia, then we can achieve cost outcomes on renewable technologies that are as competitive, if not more competitive, than existing solutions.
Thanks for that, Paul. Jarand, let me bring you in here and actually have two quick follow-up questions to what Paul said. One is how difficult or easy it is for countries like Indonesia, for example, to transition given the vast amount of domestic coal reserve and a mining industry which is dependent on it. And the second kind of sub-question to that is, what can countries in Southeast Asia learn from other parts of the world?
Yeah, thank you. So of course, in countries like Indonesia or also India and China, where you have a lot of coal resources locally, it's a push from the coal industry to use that energy source. So of course, there's a lot of resistance. It could be a lot of political resistance and local resistance. Actually leading to some kind of indirect or direct sponsoring, even on the coal industry. So we have seen, even in Russia, I've seen places where you actually had a solar plant that was not allowed to connect to the grid because of some local political resistance, because you actually were changing the local power systems. And then I'm talking about political power. So of course, it's human factors, political factors that could change what is a rational economical decision. And especially if you look at the consequences of coal in terms of local pollution and all of that, and if you put a price tag to that, I think it's actually very, very difficult for coal to struggle. So this is about politicians having the courage to actually put a price on all the pollution and also on the carbon tax. And actually then that would automatically kind of lead to a quite quick transition. But I realize that in the real world, you have all these kind of political forces that sometimes would slow down a process that is kind of more rational, I think. So that I wouldn't underestimate that. But we are actually looking at all of these systems. Now we see that all countries are actually taking actions only over the last 6 months that is much more radical than you find in any public statistics. So I think we will see very, very few new coal power plants being sanctioned for development, because basically it's not economical. It's $3-4 billion per gigawatt in a coal power plant just for the capital side, and then you have the operational cost in addition. While, for example, a solar plant could be done to 500 million, so only 1/6 of the price of the coal in capital cost upfront for the same capacity But of course, in solar, you only have like a 20% capacity factor, and in coal, you typically have like 70. But still, actually, this just shows that the business case is actually not is not there anymore. Only if you want this kind of local activity, which is overall, as I say, doesn't really make sense from an economical point of view. So, yeah, and what can we learn from other countries? I think in one way, Europe has taken the effort to develop solar and wind to economically competitive levels. So we are already on this level now. So then we can, the rest of the world can kind of benefit from this technology that has happened, and then be able to implement. You know, you have mentioned prices like 6-7 cents. I mentioned like 3 for the solar generation alone. But then I said when you added the storage, then you are getting to 6, 7, 8 maybe, but which is very competitive. So yeah, so but I see all these kind of counter forces in Indonesia and in India, especially to defend coal, even if it's not really a business case for it. So that's really a political question to be able to have that courage. Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks, Jarand. Valid point on political courage and ambition. Douglas, let me bring you in here. I think various panelists have taken a couple of different views on, given a couple of different pointers on the role of natural gas in the energy transition, right? There is obviously always a view that, you know, particularly in a region like Southeast Asia, which has significant dependence on coal, you want to kind of very quickly transition as much as possible away from coal into natural gas. That's kind of the first stage. And then you, you know, try and keep reducing the cost of renewable energy. And as Jarand said, you know, keep reducing the cost of storage to provide, you know, flexibility and provide backup. But there is obviously another view which says there's no need to transition from coal to natural gas. Storage will get very cheap very quickly, and the combination of renewable energy plus battery storage will get us there much faster. There's in fact a view out there, I think, which says that providing cheap natural gas in the initial years of the transition actually locks a certain amount of carbon emission in the economy for a longer period of time. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's an important discussion, and let's look at ASEAN as an example. I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that countries undergoing rapid economic growth are rightfully concerned about energy security, reliability, and affordability. So many countries have a different time frame and a different perspective for their energy security and their economic needs. And there needs to be a balance between what they need today versus planning for the future. I fully recognize that. I think we do need to be aware of this is a multi-decade transition that we are talking about. We're confident natural gas is the cleanest burning fossil fuel. It plays a very constructive role in that multi-decade transition that we're talking about. Again, looking at ASEAN, Thailand, for example, 70% of Thailand's power generation, nearly 70%, is gas-fired. So you already have a robust infrastructure in place. You can compensate for declining domestic natural gas production through LNG imports. You already have an existing terminal. You can complement that with very low capital cost floating storage and regasification, FSRU type infrastructure, very low capital cost. You can bring in additional natural gas supply at very competitive levels. Same is true in Vietnam, particularly in the southern part of the country. Lots of in-place gas-fired power generation, very easily can plug in cost-competitive LNG, and you're able to leverage that existing infrastructure. I do agree with some of the other panelists that new greenfield coal-fired power is, you know, I think rightfully being challenged, and we are seeing a lot of our counterparts that we talk to talking about, you know, phasing out new coal in favor of gas or renewables. For us, you know, I think we're believers in, you know, you're going to have to do both on the power side, gas plus renewables, and I can talk more about, you know, the reasons why there. But you I think we are, as a natural gas and LNG provider, we have, look, we think natural gas is going to play a very constructive role in the transition, and as I said, if you look at any of the sustainability scenarios, you look at IEA scenarios, I mean, you simply can't get there without natural gas playing a big role. So we're focused on what we can control, and that's continuing to bring down our costs, ensuring that LNG is competitive on a delivered basis in the ASEAN, and we're also taking steps to address carbon intensity of our own operations. So we've made great strides in, just over the last 4 or 5 years since we've been producing LNG. I mean, we're still a young company, but we've taken concrete steps that we've documented in our new corporate sustainability reports, and everything is on our website, but we've reduced, the methane intensity in our existing operations. We're taking, concrete steps to do what we can to improve our product offering. Was I on mute there?
Yeah,
Douglas, we lost you. I think when you are saying we are taking steps to improve the efficiency and reduce the carbon intensity of our product offering, that's when I think you cut off. It was probably last 10 seconds of what you're saying.
All right. Well, I can end there as long as I think the majority of it was okay, right?
Yeah, I think that's
all right. My apologies.
Cool, no worries. Okay, we'll keep moving on.
Right.
Douglas, thanks for that. I think you've made a very valid point on the fact that the gas industry, the first step for it is probably acknowledging some of the challenges it has itself, which is lowering cost and improving the sustainability of the offering, and then kind of working in the next decade or two around meeting some of those challenges. So thanks for that. Let me bring in Ono-san back again to this conversation and move to a slightly different part of the conversation, which is around technological innovation. And Ono-san, the question for you would be, if I was to ask you to list 2 or 3 technologies which you think are really important to decarbonize the power sector in Southeast Asia in particular, what would those be?
Yes. So as I said, the transition is the gradual, and now the hydrogen is so focused on for almost the world now. But it will take some time for that's the affordability and also the sustainability, and also that's the transportation is still the challenge to realize hydrogen society. So through that's a transition period, we are now consulting and also the co-working with all the partners. So first thing is to combat that's coal to LNG. I mean the combined cycle gas turbine technology. So Mr. Douglas pointed out that's a Thailand. They are covered almost that's a LNG, the gas turbine combined cycle power station. So also we provide that's the latest our gas turbine. That's bring the highest efficiency, more than the 64%. So this is the latest machine that can contribute to drastically to reduce that CO2 from the coal-fired power plant. And also we can apply some of the technology to keep the minimum capex to modify those existing power plant to increase some efficiency, and also we can put into some biomass co-firing for the coal power plant. The biomass is the carbon neutral, so we can maximize such a co-firing to the existing power plant. And also in Japan, we are now constructing the 2 projects of the IGCC, Integrated Gasification Combined Cycle. So 1 unit, that is the 500 megawatt capacity, that will be in the commercial operation in this year, and another is in next year. Those the IGCC technology also reduce that's the CO2, even though to utilizing more various coal. I have to say low quality coal. And in this South Asia Pacific area, so there is a very fantastically resources, geothermal, especially Philippines and Indonesia. This is the pure renewable energy source. So we can continue to explore this the geothermal power station technology, especially the countries who have such a resources. At the moment, the Philippines and Indonesia, but in future also it may be found some resources of such a resource geothermal for in this the Asia Pacific region, and we can adapt the some distributed energy like the solid oxide fuel cell. If we put into that LNG, that is more high efficiency, 75 more than 75% the energy conversion ratio. So that will contribute also the distributed energy supply system. So we have the several such a menu. Apart from the generation, also we have the battery system, and another technology is the carbon capture or CCUS. So if we adapt the carbon capture system, we can continue to utilize the gas turbine combined cycle as well as some of the latest coal-fired power station. So through the adoption in that transition, so we can also improve that hydrogen society. So we are now also co-working with such a project to produce that green hydrogen to utilize the renewable energy from the wind turbine as well as the solar panel. So, but we need that technology transition time, and also some support of the government, and also some subsidiary or the taxation system that will accelerate for our technology development.
Ono-san, thanks for that. That I think is a pretty comprehensive list of solutions outside the traditional, I think, renewable energy basket that gets mentioned. Dolf, let me bring you in quickly on this as well. Ono-san gave a comprehensive list. Anything you want to add or delete from that in terms of decarbonizing the industrial sector in particular?
As I said, electrification and green hydrogen can play a key role there. The key to that is renewable electricity. I haven't heard much yet in this panel about wind, but for example, if you look at Vietnam, very strong wind developments. Last year, 5 gigawatts of renewables was added, way above expectations, and there is a 14 gigawatt wind pipeline, so it's significant. Also, I haven't heard about the long-range cables, the plan for a cable from Australia to Singapore and tapping into the PV potential there. I mean, that opens up an enormous renewables potential. So if you combine that with renewable hydrogen, so use that renewable electricity to produce hydrogen, say for steel making, interesting opportunities there. And for example, Indonesia is also strongly looking at bioenergy as part of its mix. And of course, there are interesting opportunities, both for industrial heat and for industrial feedstock. So many opportunities in the region.
Again, an interesting set of additions there. Paul, very quick comment from you on the role of long distance transmission. It's been talked about a lot in the last 2 or 3 decades, but hasn't really been that successful. So any specific perspective on that?
Thank you. You'd think I'd learn. So look, I think long range transmission, I think it's an interesting proposal. I've noted the one that Dolf mentioned with regards to Australia, setting up a large-scale renewables hub in the Northern Territory, then running a high voltage cable through to Southeast Asia. Look, it's possible, but it's a long way, and I'm not sure how the economics will compare with, say, the other alternative, which is being spoken about in ASEAN, which is the construction of an interconnected grid, where you might see power from renewables in the Mekong Delta start to be pushed down into other countries, which, as I mentioned before, are not as blessed when it comes to having access to natural resources. So I think the point about focusing in Southeast Asia on the proposed interconnection between countries is an important point, and it's probably likely to deliver a more cost-effective solution to customers than other alternatives at this point.
Thanks for that, Paul. I think we have discussed an extensive set of options, which is in itself a very good pointer to where the energy transition is headed, right? We have probably 20 different options we've discussed today. Even if we get like 7 or 8 of those right, perhaps we can move much faster than where we are today in the energy transition. So on that optimistic note, I'd like to thank all of you. And I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference, and I wish all the other participants a great conference ahead. Thank you so much.